Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Own Devices. And this time, after a break, a very short break, we are back with another guest who is going to tell us about a topic that is really top of the mind for a country like India. We're going to talk about electric vehicles, electric scooters, and we are talking to the CEO of Ather Energy, Tarun Mehta. Tarun, welcome to the show.
Hey, hi, Nandu.
Hi. So Tarun, electric two-wheelers have been discussed in India for now, I would say 2, 3 years, maybe not always in a positive light. But the fact is that I remember a conversation, from a few years back where somebody told me the electric vehicle solution for India will not be a four-wheeler. And I'm getting more and more convinced that, for India, EV space will be more of a two-wheeler space. Do you sort of agree with that statement?
Quite powerful, quite immensely. We have something like 25, maybe 30 crore two-wheelers on our roads, not including cycles. 72 or 78% of Indian households have a two-wheeler. We are essentially a two-wheeler country. Like two-wheelers are the largest users of petrol in India by a good margin. They just outcompete every other form of transportation in just sheer number of vehicles and energy consumed. So if you want an actual impact, size impact, scale impact, volume impact, savings impact, two-wheelers have to go electric. We don't drive 30 kilometers to the nearest Walmart to shop. We don't have 3 cars in a family of 4. What we have are 2 or 3 scooters and bikes.
Yes.
So the Indian EV story, our story of cleaning up our roads and going to renewable sources in transportation, essentially a story of electrification of two-wheelers.
It's been a few years of this story in India. How has that panned out? Are you happy with where the EV scooter space is in India right now, or has it actually grown better or bigger, faster than you have thought this space would be, for 2023?
It's been several years of build-up and then a crazy growth phase over 2 years. When we started in 2013, we just incorporated in 2013, and we just had a few ideas. I remember I kind of felt we were the second or maybe the third generation of EVs trying to make it in India. The first 2 generations were, I would say, the Reva car. And I think very powerful as an idea, but again, India has a two-wheeler story first. And the second wave was a lot of China imported electric scooters that had come in India, but they hadn't worked. So when we launched, frankly, we had humble ambition. I remember actually as early as 2018, 2019, making a case that the market for electric scooters in India probably won't be more than 10, 15,000 units a month for a very long time, and just across the top 20, 30 cities. And it, in fact, was till 2021 start. I think the market was 10,000 units a month, but then it just exploded. I think this month will probably do 65, 70,000 units a month. So the industry has grown almost 7, 8 times. And I think it has surprised even the most optimistic projections. So I feel pretty happy. I feel pretty excited about where the industry is and where it's gotten to in the last few years.
And is it exactly an urban story? Because for instance, I'm from Kerala and I see a lot more EVs, two-wheeler and four-wheeler in a market like Kerala than I would see in Noida, for instance. And it's also, I think, because of a practical aspect that a lot of people live in high rises. It's not very easy to charge. You don't have, you still don't have a California kind of situation where every parking lot has at least a couple of EV chargers and all of that. So is it actually panning out slightly differently from the rest of the world?
It's definitely a different story, but what's kind of happening is scooters is where electrification's begun. So wherever scooters do well, electric vehicles are doing phenomenally well. And scooters tend to do better where per capita GDP is higher. It's a pretty simple correlation. So Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Gujarat, Goa, all states, higher per capita GDP, higher scooter penetration,
Yeah, I
and
hadn't made that correlation.
yeah, and all states with very strong EV penetration, including
Yeah,
Delhi, right?
yeah.
But many other states have lower per capita GDP, and bike sales are higher and scooter sales are lower, and we are yet to come up with a great electric bike. So the story is more concentrated in these areas today. I think charging is less of a problem, frankly. Driving a scooter, you're not really trying to solve the problem of, I don't know, like Bombay, Goa, or
Mhm.
Chennai, Bangalore. Nobody really imagines while buying a two-wheeler, like a scooter, that, you know what, I've got to travel to Hyderabad quite often.
Yep, true.
Uh, so charging is less of a concern. And for whatever it is worth, I think India is coming up with a fairly distinct and unique charging infrastructure story in itself. Our standards are truly Indian. Our standards are coming up locally, and you're seeing a pretty healthy network already for charging. But I don't think charging's yet the biggest problem. It'll become a big problem once we get to a very large scale, but we are still in the early stages.
Mhm. So, the other question I wanted to ask you is that you mentioned the Chinese scooters, for instance, right? And they
Yeah,
were not successful, right? And maybe among the few Chinese things that have not been very successful in a market like India.
yeah.
So is it also because for a market like India, we have different problems and from everything, from our roads to the way people use two-wheelers to the kind of environment weather we have. So do you have to really rethink what an EV is for the Indian market, and how did you do that?
Very spot on. So the reason Chinese electric scooters haven't worked out is exactly because of what you said. In everything else, India is a less complicated market. Mobile phones, telephones, I don't know, DTH antennas, a lot of other stuff. But two-wheelers, India is a very sophisticated market. We don't want to just buy the entry level two-wheeler, like something that just
Mhm.
barely gives us mobility.
Yeah,
People buy a scooter, like they don't even buy, like, let's say, like they don't even buy in a, the highest selling scooter historically has been Honda Activa, which is like a 110cc scooter. But
yeah.
there are cheaper and smaller scooters in 100cc, in 90cc that existed, 75cc that existed. They couldn't
We
beat
had
Honda.
the mofa. I don't know if anybody knows, remember us. We had something called the mofa, which is basically a pipe with two wheels on it.
Yeah, bad idea, right? And I think we all
Yeah,
of us know that in India, like there is a minimum, there is a the base expectation with a scooter or a motorcycle in India is actually quite substantial. And obviously our roads, our vibrations, our heat, our grid situation, the noise you have in it, all of this basically ends up meaning that what you typically get in China just does not work in India. Like there's a huge
yeah.
difference. So India is definitely a more sophisticated and a higher spec market in terms of two-wheelers compared to China. And also the Indian two-wheeler industry is actually a pretty powerful one. It's it is the most competent two-wheeler industry anywhere in the world. Uh, so I think what we are now building and designing in India is going to become the template for what will be successful anywhere else in the world except China.
As in the world. Yeah, yeah,
Actually, electric two-wheelers is the only place where China has not been able to, like, revolutionize the entire world. Like while it has
yeah.
a large domestic industry, it's not been able to export boatloads of these electric two-wheelers in other markets, whether it's Latin or Southeast Asia or Europe or anywhere. But what we are now building in India, the kind of density of talent that's coming together for light electric vehicles, the kind of investment that's happening, I think this is creating this creating a combination. This is finally creating a product that actually can be exported. So I think India has the best shot at cracking the electric two-wheeler market for the world. Um, and in that sense, we are lucky that what China had to offer didn't really work for us.
So as a company, how did Ather rethink or redesign, what is that electric two-wheeler for the Indian market?
Huge investments in R&D, probably unprecedented
Mhm.
for a startup in India. Um, for the first 8 years of Ather's life, we basically were okay to basically say no revenue and put in every single rupee raised. And we raised a fair bit of capital in even the first 8 years, every last thing into R&D. So I remember um, before we launched the product, we had a 300-member engineering and design team. And I remember meeting suppliers in the Indian landscape who were just like mind blown. What are you guys doing? How are you guys doing this? Like, who's letting you hire 300 people, put them together? And like, this is high quality R&D, right? Like, it's not like
Yeah.
just testing. It's pretty competent testing. It's amazing design work. How are you guys like funding all of this? I think that was a big differentiator for you. We managed to stick to our story. We said at the start that the opportunity is to build a solid EV platform from scratch in India. The opportunity is, and the opportunity is to build brand new products from scratch in India. And if you want to do that, we'll have to have all this innovation happen locally. We can't do the traditional thing of finding joint venture partners, importing
Hmm.
technology, bringing that to India for the first time. और कोई बना नहीं रहा है. It's not like anybody else is
Yeah.
really successful electric scooters
Yeah.
or bikes outside India, and China tech doesn't seem to work. So this is a lot of work, but there's also the opportunity. Build all this IP here locally. So Ather did that. We built that R&D team, and we've generally consistently run over the last now almost a decade the largest R&D from my assessment in the world for electric two-wheelers. Now approaching about, I think, a little bit more than 1,000 people, which created a very large patent portfolio, which created a massive amount of completely new tech. I don't know how much you would know this, but for connected scooters and motorcycles, what we built and what now the ecosystem is building in India is
Hmm.
the global benchmark. Like there is no market more sophisticated or more complex than India on connected two-wheelers. Like everybody else is still scratching their head around how do we put a SIM card on a vehicle? How do we get Bluetooth
Yeah.
connectivity?
Yeah.
And we moved on to like what is the latest generation Qualcomm processor, 5-inch, 7-inch,
Yeah.
9-inch, 10-inch dashboards, touchscreen dashboard on a scooter in mainstream mass scooters.
Mhm.
Just the sheer amount of IP that now exists in India for light electric vehicles, it's just mind-boggling.
You mentioned the R&D and the kind of investment you would have put into it, but um, at the end of the day, being a startup in a two-wheeler space,
Uh,
I'm sure what came after the R&D was also not easy, right? You would have to really, like, especially getting into the manufacturing part, and that's uh, again, you are in a segment where, like, India has so many players which have been literally exporting to the world for years. Like, so how do you tackle the manufacturing part?
I would actually argue the manufacturing was the slightly easier piece compared to cracking design because we didn't do a lot of design locally, but we did do a fair bit of
Hmm.
manufacturing locally. So I think finding great talent and good understanding of how to set up plants, how to set up supply chains that exist. The challenging pieces were, I would say, setting up, finding and creating new suppliers from scratch. When Ather
Hmm.
started, like there was not a single company making motors for electric scooters in India. And I remember meeting some of our partners like in Europe and convincing their boards. There were directors that listen, this will be a great idea for you to move to India and set up plants for the big wave of EVs that is going to come up in India. Uh,
Hmm.
so there's a lot of that work that happened. Building the first connected and the first EVs in India that also meant the entire supply chain around semiconductors was something that basically nobody had touched. Nobody had built relationships with most of the semicon companies as an automotive company in India. So that was the first, and a lot of this took time. Building that supply chain from scratch, convincing people to move, convincing them to put in capex, convincing them to hire people, then convincing them to hire engineers in India, which was just like crazy for them. What, you want us to hire engineers in India? No, we would just bring the tech and set up manufacturing. Like, no, no, no. Also, I want to build a 20-30 member engineering team, which will work with our
Yeah.
engineers in like sort of commercializing this. I think it was, yeah, that was a really damn hard phase. Uh, and that manufacturing itself, a little less challenging because the basic SOPs existed in India.
I get the sense that for the EV space, you literally set up the ecosystem, right? Because you had to work on everything from scratch and you sort of built it up, which also means that you had a gap when it came to talent, right? So how do you fill that gap? I'm sure a lot of work would have gone into, because this is a greenfield segment in a way.
It was. So most of the engineers today probably will trace their carriers back to Ather at some point in the light EV two-wheeler space in India. So wave one, I would say phase one was 2014 to 2017. The first 3 years was us hiring a lot of engineers who had done a lot of hands-on work, building some sort of a vehicle in their college years. And we found a good hunting ground, which was people who had worked on Formula SAE, which are these race cars that students build for competitions.
Yeah.
We realized people who work on them seem to love hard work, seem to love building things with their hands, and are very, very passionate. So the word
Yeah.
spread very quickly. Some of our early team members were SAE, Formula SAE team members, including my co-founder Swapnil. And one guy would put another guy would put another, pull in another. And I think of the first 50, maybe half of the folks were Formula SAE folks. And the joke almost was, join Ather because you get to build the same vehicle. You get to do the same work that you did while building those vehicles in college, but you actually got paid for it, right? And you didn't have to put your money to build those vehicles.
Yeah.
So the first phase was that. Almost all talent was fresh, young folks with no automotive background or grounding. Phase two was a fair bit of experience coming in, especially when the industrialization manufacturing phase was happening, 2017 to 2019, 2020 onwards, which is when we also brought in a lot of experienced professionals from the industry, running a plastic tool or a lighting tool or running a assembly line. So bringing talent externally was very helpful. But phase three sort of again goes back. By phase three, basics of industrialization had kicked in, and it was a lot of new design, new cool work again. So again, a lot of new talents coming in. But yeah, a large part of our talent, especially in the engineering side, and most of our leadership is largely homegrown. So most of the folks that you will see are 6, 7, 8 years at Ather, who are now in leadership roles, and pretty much all of them build their careers at Ather over the last decade.
So a part of this ecosystem is also the customer. Like how much of making the customer aware that this is a new segment, there's a new product, works differently. How much of that how much of that did you have to do, or was it something given because people were already aware that because there is already a lot of interest in this segment even before the first real devices, the vehicles came in?
No, there was it wasn't easy. In phase one, we did a lot of consumer and market outreach. We used to do these events from 2016 called open houses, where in our office in Bangalore, we would host 50 to 100 people at a time, typically on weekends for 3 to 4 hours. And this was our opportunity to tell people that, listen, electric vehicles can be cool, and what we are building is going to be amazing. So you want to support us, you want to follow us, and you want to believe in this, and go spread the word that something cool is happening in EV in Bangalore, in India. We did a lot of them. We did, I think, 20, 30 open house events. In fact, we went to other cities and also did open house events. We went to Chennai, we went to Hyderabad, we went to Pune, Mumbai, Delhi, Ahmedabad. We did the open house events in many, many different places over the years. So for the first few years, I would say till 2019, 2020, there was a lot of market convincing that we spent effort on. Obviously, today's scene is different. Every two-wheeler company is now building electric. So consumers are actually actively looking which product to buy. But go back in time 4 years or 4, 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. In fact, I remember the first time we were building a store, I was quite insistent that we'll not set up a dealership. We'll set up our own store because we've got to make a statement. We've got to convince people that we're not selling a toy, that what we're building is really cool, is really powerful, and it's an amazing product. So a lot of our design team spent a lot of the time in designing the store and making sure that people would take us seriously, because EV was not an easy thing to sell back then.
And I can tell you, having seen a couple of your stores, they do stand out. And I think it's a conscious effort too. You have even chosen locations where they do stand out, right? They make a statement, and I'm very, very happy to hear that was a very intentional, and I can understand the logic behind it now.
Yeah.
So other thing is, you've been here for a few years now. So what kind of a product roadmap do you have right now? And has it changed from what maybe you thought would be the product roadmap maybe when when your first two-wheeler was coming out? And now, because you understand the market better, you understand customer needs better, has it evolved in the 5 years?
The market definitely has evolved. See, many years ago, like what we built in our first product, Ather 450, it was the only product we had, and hence it was supposed to be everything for everybody, right? It was supposed to be a family scooter. It was supposed to be a great product for young buyers, for old buyers, for second-time buyers, for male, female, all age groups, city, tier one, tier two, everything. But the market's come a long way now. Uh, People now have more nuanced expectations. People want something different from a family scooter. People want something different in a sports scooter. People want something different in a college going use case. So the what's ahead for us is portfolio expansion. We need and we are now building many more such products. The core technology is already built out, and that's actually pretty stable
Mhm.
now.
Yeah.
uh, uh, so what you now want to take is take that technology but put that in multiple different products. I'm a big believer that the Indian two-wheeler market is going to be largely dominated by scooters by the end of this decade, and hence
Mhm.
it's going to be scooter first. So we're going to have multiple scooters in the portfolio over the next few years. We'll also have a couple of bikes, but they will follow a little later. But over the next 2 years, there's going to be a big push with a lot of new models, a lot of new products, and all of them scooters. Later after that, there will be a few bikes that will follow. And that's basically because the customers now expect that. They want more options, they want different form factors. So we'll build those for them.
A critical part of this conversation is also the battery, right? And I guess you would have had to think about the battery also from a very Indian perspective. Is the
Uh,
battery technology going to change drastically in the coming years, or do you think what you have right now is going to stay for a few years because as you said, you have maybe nailed it right now?
Battery has seen a lot of changes since we started. I think we've changed our cell format at least 3 times. The
Mhm.
underlying chemistry is kind of flip flopped 2 3 times, and that's the nature of this industry. A particular chemistry makes a lot of sense, and see, there's a lot of global tailwinds for specific
Mhm.
choices,
Yeah.
which we may or may not fully control. Like there will come a time when like a cylindrical cell will make more sense than a pouch cell. But then there will come a time when a pouch cell will be much better. Why? Because the supply chain for a particular format
Yes.
are going to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
capacitized to a certain degree. Um, some chemistries will come into fashion. Some chemistries will fall out. So यहाँ पे बहुत changes होता है. I think practically every year you're dealing with something new. I think what you're
Mhm.
really investing in kind of securing is a great capability to handle these changes. But
Okay.
on two things, which is software and connectivity, and second is battery tech,
Mhm.
you don't have stability. You have constant changes, and hence you have constant design work on that.
And one last thing, so you mentioned how, like, we are way ahead or more evolved now in the EV space. So do you think that that sort of, sets up India, Ather for a leadership kind of role globally?
Oh, absolutely. I think, in fact, two-wheelers and electric two-wheelers will be one of those very few things in the next 10 to 15 years that India will be an absolute global leader on. See, luckily, even with petrol two-wheelers, India is one of the largest
Yeah.
exporters in the world, if not the largest exporter. And I don't think electric will be any different. In fact, electric will be even more consolidated because at least in petrol two-wheelers, you had the Japs who
Mhm.
sort of had a huge legacy strength, right?
Yeah.
With Honda, Kawasaki, Suzuki,
Yeah.
all have built fantastic products over multiple decades. But in electric, that's not true. In electric, the best tech today exists with us here in India, uh,
Mhm.
with Indian companies, with Indian engineers. And because our market is growing super fast, it's pulling in a lot of suppliers. So some of the best, not some of the best, possibly the best ancillary network in the world for electric two-wheelers today exists in India, and it's growing crazy fast. So it just stands to reason that we will also become the largest exporter very quickly, and Indian tech will dominate the landscape globally. What we will build in India will shape the two-wheeler market globally in the coming 10, 15, 20 years. Today, we're already at a place where Indian two-wheelers are considered good quality, but I think we will become the benchmark for quality because nobody else will be close to in terms of product stability more better than India. It's already, by the way, true. It's just that we're not exporting.
Yeah.
Like once it starts exporting and other players in the ecosystem start exporting, it'll be a pretty obvious thing to buyers outside.
So Tarun, that's a wonderful optimistic note to sort of wind up our podcast. Thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me over.
So you were listening to Our Own Devices, and this time we had Tarun Mehta of Ather Energy. We'll be back again next week with another guest and a lot more knowledge and insight. Till then, we are available everywhere you listen to your podcast.